The noose swung lazy in the heat, a frayed loop the color of old straw. Noon light beat on Jericho Flats, on the clapboard roofs, on the faces pressed close to the courthouse yard. Sheriff Cole Trask stood beside the lever boots, planted badge bright as a coin. He read the sentence with a voice that carried through dust and flies. Lena Hart, by order of Judge Edwin Pike, for the poisoning of an officer of the United States and sedition against the territory. Sentence is death by hanging. The mission bell across the square did not ring. It hung cracked and black, a mouth that had forgotten how to speak. Lena looked at it and counted the breath in her chest. Dry air, metal taste. She felt the hemp fibers through the skin of her neck before they settled there. Trask watched her like he watched a horse that had been a trouble to break. "Any last words?" he said. Her answer was a small thing, a blink, a swallow. The bell's dull throat gave back nothing. Trask nodded at the man on the rope. 3 days earlier, the sky was white as bone. Lena ran the scrub flats until the world tilted. Sage slapped her knees. Her tongue stuck to her teeth. She held her side with one hand and the other clutched a leather satchel tight against her ribs. Inside paper rasped paper. A glass vial clicked the buckle. Hoofbeats had faded sometime before noon, and the land grew still, a wide basin of glare and hum. She touched the welt on her shoulder where a rifle stock had kissed her blue. Forward was an instinct more than a plan. A fence line appeared, posts gray and split. Beyond it, cottonwoods and a square of shade. The smell of water was faint, but it lifted her a thin promise. She crawled under the bottom wire, tore her skirt, and stumbled to the trough behind a windmill. Dragonflies buzzed the surface. She went to her knees. The first swallow was cold and mean. It burned the cracked places. She drank again, slower, and the world sharpened. He came out from the barn with a rifle in the crook of his arm. "That is my water," he said. His shirt sleeves were rolled. He had a surgeon's hands, clean and careful. A white scar showed under the sun on his left forearm, a cross shape not meant to be pretty. He was lean, a man who had not wasted any movement in a long time. His eyes were a shade of gray that took the measure of things without warming to them. "I will work for it," Lena said. Her voice was rough. "Chop wood, shovel, patch fence. I just need a place to sit for an hour." "You are bleeding," he said. She looked down. Blood had bloomed through the seam at her side, a rose the color of rust. She laughed, a small sound that surprised her. He set the rifle aside and crouched. "Elias Boone," he said, as if a name made anything simple. "Stand if you can. The steps are closer than they look." She stood. He did not offer an arm. On the porch, he opened the satchel with 2 fingers and looked at the edges of the papers. He did not pull them free. He did not touch the vial. "Inside," he said. The house smelled of carbolic and coffee, of wool and dust. On a table by the window, a weathered doctor's kit sat open. Needles lined up like little bones, scissors with a nick in one blade, a spool of gut shining like a snail's trail. He washed his hands. He rinsed the wound. He stitched. His hands moved without fuss. She kept her eyes on the moth trapped between glass and curtain, its papery body beating a steady panic. "You know what you are doing," she said. "Once," he said, "in a different war." "Which war?" she asked. "The one nobody admits happened," he said. A horse snorted outside. Lena's head moved before his. The needle paused in his fingers. "Stay quiet," he said. He stepped to the window and looked with one eye through the side of the curtain. 3 riders stood at the fence line, dust on their hats, badges at 2 chests. The man at the center wore a black coat in heat that would fry an egg. Sheriff Cole Trask had a way of standing that turned the world into a stage with him at the middle. Afternoon, Doc Trask called. "You got company. We lost her tracks by the basin. Thought she might drift toward water like a smart snake. You seen any strangers?" Elias took his time to answer. He wiped his hands on a cloth. He did not look at Lena, who had already slid off the table and tucked herself behind the stacked wood box by the hearth. She pulled the satchel tight to her chest. The vial whispered against the buckle and stilled. "I have not had a paying customer in a month," Elias said, stepping onto the porch. He leaned against the post in a way that said this was his shade. "You want coffee, Sheriff?" Trask smiled. It was a nice smile. It did not lift his eyes. "I drink coffee when it is cool enough to hold the cup. Step aside." Elias did not step. Trask stepped anyway, boots on old boards. He took the threshold with the habit of a man who had not needed to ask permission in years. He stood just inside the door. He did not walk farther. His gaze took a slow sweep. The corner held a heap of burlap sacks. A boot toe stuck out from under one, just the leather tip. He looked at it. He looked away. He lifted a finger and ran it along the windowsill. It came away clean. "You keep a tidy place," he said. "Tidy keeps flies down," Elias said. That smell is carbolic, Trask said. You fixing animals out here? Once in a while, Elias said. You ride this far to judge my housekeeping. Trask turned his head. The mission bell on the far ridge hung shadowed between two cottonwoods. He stared at it as if it might speak. When it did not, he looked back at Elias and smiled again. Word is, a woman from the rail camp knows more than she should, Trask said. Word is, she took something that belongs to a colonel who keeps careful books. Word is, she made a fool out of a drunk lieutenant, and the lieutenant died in his soup. I hate words. I prefer facts. Facts, Elias said. Facts, Trask said. He tapped his boot heel against the porch. Lamb's wool snagged on a nail head. He took a step back out into the glare. If you see her, Doc, you let me know. You owe the territory that much, since you do not owe it taxes. I owe nobody, Elias said. Trask lifted his eyes to the windmill. The blades cut the afternoon light slow and even. That is true for now, he said, until a judge tells you different. He put his hat back on with 2 fingers and nodded. The 2 deputies turned their horses. The sound of hooves faded into the scrub. Trask did not mount. He stood at the fence and looked at the house a long time as if he might memorize the grain of wood. Then he took a cigarette from his pocket and lit it. He smoked, flicked the butt, and walked away without looking back. Elias watched dust settle. Then he stepped inside and shut the door. The moth beat once against the glass and was still. Lena came out from behind the woodbox. Sweat had made a cross out of the dust on her throat. Her eyes were bright in a face that had no color left. "Why did you not turn me over?" she said. "You are bleeding on my floor," he said. "Hand me the satchel." She held it tighter. "I pulled a bullet from your side," he said. "I do not think you can outrun me in your state." She walked to the table and set the satchel there like it might break. He opened it. He did not pull anything free. He let his fingers hover over the lid a moment, then he closed it again and slid it back toward her. "It is not mine to read," he said. "What is your name?" She looked at the cracked bell through the window and spoke without looking at him. "Lena Hart." "I guessed Lena," he said. "Hart is new. Why are they hunting you?" She touched the welt at her shoulder. The glass vial made a small sound when her cuff brushed it. She took a breath that was almost a cough. "I saw something," she said, "and I kept a piece of it." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. He cleaned the last of the blood from her side. He wrapped the wound. He tied the knot with the neatness of a man who understood the cost of sloppy work. He put away the needle. Outside, the windmill groaned. The trough sloshed. A crow landed on the fence post and tipped its head black bead eyes that knew carrion when it saw it. The rope that held the bucket to the well frame creaked as it took a slow swing. Elias lifted the edge of the curtain with 2 fingers and looked toward the horizon. A plume of dust lifted beyond the cottonwoods and held in the white air. Not 3 riders this time. More. He let the curtain fall. He reached for the rifle. The house was quiet except for the soft hiss of the stove and the sound of Lena's breathing steady now and close. The curtain breathed once when Elias let it fall. The room held its heat like a foundry. Outside, the windmill groaned and the trough lapped. In the far white air, the new dust plume swelled and tightened until it had weight. Lena sat very still on the table. The stitch line pulsed. A taste of soap and copper sat at the back of her tongue. She looked at the satchel. He looked at the door. "Cellar," he said. She slid down and followed him past the stove. The cellar door in the floor was flush with the boards and took a knife to flick up. Damp earth smell rose in a small, cool breath. Shelves with jars, a coil of rope, a lantern with soot on the glass. He helped her down the first 2 steps and let go. No touch lingered. "Quiet until I say different," he said. She nodded. Her palms left 2 dark marks on the rail. He lowered the door, set the knife back in place, and crossed the room. The rifle leaned in the corner like a question he did not want to answer yet. They heard the riders before they saw them. Hooves quick and light, the sound of tack. Metal clicked on buckle, small and neat. Voices low. Elias stood in the window and became a fixed line in the room. 3 deputies took the yard in a curve and stopped. Another 2 moved to the barn. Sheriff Cole Trask came last. He did not hurry. He stepped down with a coat over his arm and a clean hat in his hand. His shirt stuck to his back across the shoulders. He took the porch as if it had not been someone else's a minute ago. "Doc," he said. He sounded like a man tasting his own name in a good mouth. "We forgot to talk about one thing." "You talked plenty," Elias said. "That was greeting," Trask said. "This is search." He nodded, and 2 men pushed past boots wet with sweat, hands loose on pistols. They split the front room from the kitchen without looking at each other. Drawers pulled and shut. A chair moved, then moved back. The neat habit of men who had done this every week for years. Trask stayed in the frame of the door and watched Elias watch him. "You keep old medicine," Trask said. "The smell of it sticks." "It keeps flies from breeding in people," Elias said. "Flies go where the meat is," Trask said. A deputy thumped a boot heel on a board by the stove. He crouched. He ran his hand along the seam where the floor met a post. Elias did not move. The deputy stood bored already and crossed to the pantry. The wind outside had started to shift. The sky changed tone from white to a green that made the eyes ache. Static raised the hairs along Elias's arms. He listened for the small sound under the boards. He heard only his own breath and the moth at the window. Trask picked up a cup, looked at the crack in its lip, and set it down again. "Colonel Sykes does not like it when things walk away from him," Trask said. "He pays me to walk them back. I am not a patient man. I can be thorough." "You always were," Elias said. Trask considered the words and the way Elias said them. He looked at the white scar on Elias's forearm. The cross sat there like a brand that time had not softened. Trask smiled a little. "I recall a field where good stitches went into bad boys," Trask said. "You cut faster than the others. You were not sentimental." "It was work," Elias said. "It still is," Trask said. He turned and spoke low to a deputy. "Tom, you sit the windmill till morning. If anyone takes water, you tell me what their face looks like before you shoot it off." Tom tipped his hat and went. Trask stepped off the porch and stood at the trough. He dipped 2 fingers into the water and smoothed his hair back with the wet. The bones at his wrist clicked. "If a stranger comes through this yard, Doc, you remember the oath you took," Trask said. "You bring him my way. I will take care of the rest." He walked without hurry to his horse. The others followed. The dust they'd brought lingered and then slid away down the lane. The house took its own breath again. Elias waited a long time. He counted it in the creak of the windmill, in the shift of the crow on the fence, in the slow hiss of the stove going soft. He opened the cellar door, and the cool air lifted. Lena blinked up at him. There was dirt on her cheek where she had put her hand. She climbed. Her knees did not like it. She stood with both palms on the table and did not speak until the room came back into shape. "They left a man," she said. "Tom," Elias said. "He likes to chew on grass and spit lies. He is not bright enough to know he is watched while he watches." Lena opened the satchel and took out a folded ledger page. She did it neat. No sound from the paper. She set it face down. "I cannot lose this," she said, "or the glass." "You will not," he said. She looked at him. He watched the way her fingers did not shake. "What did you see at the rail camp?" he said. "A barrel that did not smell like whiskey," she said. "Bottles filled and sent to the men. The lieutenant bragged about a tonic that made boys forget the desert. He kept the ledger, numbers and initials. Then he put his face in his supper and never took it out again." "Colonel Alton Sykes," Elias said. She nodded. "Trask works his dirty ground. Everyone says so and nobody says so." Elias looked at the white scar on his arm. The cross had been cut and burned deep on a different summer on a different table. He had thought about that mark the day he left the last field hospital. He thought about it now and did not say a thing. The first wind hit the porch with sound enough to turn both their heads. The sky had turned the color of a bruise. Sand began to move in long, low sheets, then in a wall that frayed at the top. The windmill squealed and then locked. The cottonwoods leaned. A smell of rain that had not arrived yet slid along the tongue like a word you knew before you heard it. Elias took a coil of rawhide from a peg and the rifle from the corner. "You will ride the mare," he said. "She hates loudness, but she runs straight." Lena pulled her skirt up to the knee and wrapped a strip of cloth around her waist. She put on a man's coat he handed her. It hung past her hips, and the cuffs hid her stitches. She tied the satchel strap across her body and let it fall under the coat. The glass clicked once against the buckle and then went quiet. They stepped into the yard, and the world hit them. Sand in the teeth, sand in the eyes. The porch went out of sight when the gusts came and came again. The windmill turned a quarter and froze, turned and froze, a lurching notch at a time. Elias kept one palm on the mare's neck. The horse shook its head and snorted, eyes showing white. Tom sat on the windmill's strut with his collar up and his hat tied under his chin. He held a bandana across his mouth and squinted at the yard through slits in the cloth. He did not see much. He did not want to. Elias walked into the scrub like a man who might just be checking fence wire. He walked past the corner of the barn, then around it. He moved slow enough to be nothing. Lena counted heartbeats and held the mare's lead with her fingers in a loop. The rope burned in the places where the skin was already raw. A squeal came off the windmill like a hurt thing. Tom craned his head. The brake had slipped. The wheel spun and hammered. He cursed and slid down the strut to fix it. He set his boots on the trough rail and reached. Elias was behind him before the first cuss word ended. He took Tom by the belt and the back of the neck and put him face down in the dusty grass. The rifle's weight settled into the deputy's ribs. Tom bucked once, then quit. "You remember me," Elias said into the wind. Tom tried to answer. Sand got in. He coughed. Elias tied his hands with 3 turns and a knot that did not look like a knot. He tied his feet to the bottom rung of the windmill ladder. Tom spoke again, his voice thick. "You will not get far," he spat, and the spit blew back into his own face. "Far is more than here," Elias said. He came back to the porch and took the mare's lead from Lena. He checked the cinch, then put the reins in her hand. The second horse, a sorrel with one eye fogged, stood with its head low and let Elias throw a small pack over its withers. They did not use the gate. Elias took a pair of cutters from his pocket and clipped the back wire. He held it up, and she walked the mare through. The sorrel followed on its own. The first drops hit, then wide and mean, and the dust turned to gum under their boots. They moved in the lee of cottonwoods until the fence ran out and the land opened. The old mission sat dark on the ridge, windows punched. The bell hung black in its frame. A line of bats ran the roof edge and lifted as they passed. Lightning stitched a seam in the sky from one horizon to the other. The thunder walked after it on long legs that shook the dirt. They crossed a dry wash that was not dry anymore. The water there was only ankle-deep and friendly, then knee-deep and not friendly at all. The mare set her ears and went. Lena kept her seat with her jaw tight. The coat drank water and clung. The satchel strap pulled against her shoulder like a hand. The sorrel stumbled and came up again. Elias kept the line on his fingers and talked to the horse in a voice that did not carry. He did not look back. He did not raise the rifle. He counted his steps aloud. The numbers stayed steady. They found the road by smell more than sight. It had the old grease scent of wagons and iron. A lantern burned under a cottonwood where the road narrowed past a slump in the bank. 2 men sat there on crates. One rolled a cigarette. One held the lantern up and let a moth fling itself at the glass until the singe left a grease mark. They were bored. Bored men were sometimes worse than alert ones. Elias put his hand up. "Stop!" He let the horses breathe. He looked at the ditch and the low place you could barely name. Lena followed his measure without asking. They slid into sage and lay there with the wet smell of it in their noses. Rain ticked on hat brims and the rim of the satchel. The 2 men argued about a card game and the debt that came after. One laughed, and the laugh was not mean. The lantern hissed and guttered and caught itself again with a steady beat. The moth kept bodying the glass like it had forgotten how to be afraid. A wagon creaked in the distance, the axle dry, and the 2 men stood and stepped out to the middle of the road to light the way. That was enough. Elias touched Lena's boot with his hand and they moved, quiet over mud and rock, quiet past a place where water sounded like someone tearing cloth. They came out above the wash again and watched it from the ridge. It had turned from brown to red with clay. Branches and a broken ladder rode the surface and went out of sight. The rain stopped like a hand had closed a door. The air smelled of wet iron and sage. Far ahead where the land fell and rose again, a low field of lights burned. Jericho Flats sat in a shallow bowl and put up its gold like a man who was sure he would not be robbed. The mare lifted her head and blew. Elias put his hand on her neck. He looked at the town and then at her. He did not say anything. They took the old mission slope to keep the ridge between them and the road. The weeds there reached to their knees and slapped wet against their shins. The bell hung above them. A gust pushed through the arch and the clapper moved. The cracked iron spoke one thin note that did not belong to any hour. Lena's hand found the satchel strap without thinking. Elias turned his face toward the sound and then away. In the valley, a whip of light moved along the outer street like a slow comet. The shape behind it shifted and stopped and shifted again. The wind lay down. The note from the bell fell dead. Somewhere below, a dog barked at itself and then quit. A match flared a small, hot rose, and a figure with a black coat lit a cigarette and leaned on a post, as if he had been leaning there his whole life. The match burned down to Trask's fingers. He shook it and let the dark take back the street. Rain clung to eaves and dripped slow. The bell on the ridge was only a shadow, a black mouth against blacker sky. Elias led the mare along the backside of Jericho Flats, where fences gave way to scrub and junked wagons. They tied both horses behind a stack of split rails near a livery wall that held the day's heat under wet boards. The sorrel put its head to Elias's shoulder and breathed old hay in fear. He patted the cheekbone once and left it. They took the alley behind the mercantile. The rain had rinsed the dust and left a film of clay that held boot prints like memory holds names. A single window spilled yellow onto the mud. Inside, tins lined a shelf like soldiers. A cat slept on a sack of flour and did not lift its head. The pine box had a door on the alley that stuck in damp weather. Elias set his shoulder to it, and it gave with a sound like a wet cough. The smell was beer and lamp oil and old wood. A piano sat silent with its keys like old teeth. May Abbott stood behind the bar with her arms bare to the elbow, counting in her head and moving coins into stacks. She did not startle. She looked at Elias and then at Lena and then at the coat that hid the satchel. "You look like work," May said. "You always did see straight," Elias said. May flicked her eyes toward the front room where 4 men sat with cards, and a 5th watched with a grin that did not reach his eyes. She did not look at the door. She did not look at the mirror behind the bar that showed the whole of the room in a crooked way. She set 2 cracked cups on the counter and poured coffee. "Back pantry," she said softly. 50 heartbeats, then out the kitchen. Take the breezeway to the boarding house, room 4. Orson Vale will not be sleeping. He pretends to love ledgers more than he loves life. Elias put his hand on the counter and left a print the color of wet earth. "You are risking your liquor license," he said. "I do not have one," May said. She pushed open the pantry door with her hip. The smell of onions and dill came out. Lena slipped through. The room was 4 by 6 with hooks for cured meat and a small window cut high. She leaned her back on the cool wall. The moth motif found them here too. A pale winged thing tapped the glass and could not find the hole it came in by. She watched it for a count that eased her pulse. Elias came in behind her, pulled the door to, and stood close enough that she could see rain beads on his lashes. "You trust her," Lena said. "I trust the way she hates Trask," he said. They listened to the bar room. A chair scraped. Someone laughed the way a man laughs when he has decided to lose without being seen. Coins clicked again. May blew out the breath she had been holding, and the lamp guttered and steadied. May opened the pantry and put a loaf of bread on a shelf as if that were why she had come. "Go," she said. They went through the kitchen where a stew that had given up hours ago still sent up a tired smell. Steam hung near the ceiling. A boy in an apron slept on a sack of potatoes with his cap over his eyes. Elias touched the door with his fingertips and eased it open. The breezeway took them into a lane where clay held rain in shallow mirrors and showed the sky in pieces. The boarding house had paint that had been white 2 seasons ago and was not white now. A tall lamp burned in the hall, and someone had placed a saucer of water under it to catch moths. The saucer was full. Elias knocked once on the frame of room 4. The door opened a hand's width, and an eye looked into the hall with the coolness of a man who knew that he should have moved to a safer town and had not. "Dr. Boone," Orson Vale said in a careful voice. "I thought you hated company." "Tonight I like it," Elias said. Judge Orson Vale wore a vest that puckered a little under his belt and a shirt with a collar that was too tight. His face was narrow and his hair had been combed back with water. He had a gold seal on the small table beside a ledger. He had a pen that had stained his fingers for years. The room smelled of ink and damp wool. Lena stepped in and took off the coat. The blood freight in the lining had turned the fabric into a stiff thing. Vale saw it and his mouth set. He looked from her to Elias and then to the satchel when it touched the table. He did not reach. He waited. "Tell me without saying anything I can be quoted on," he said. Lena opened the satchel and set out the things that mattered. A ledger leaf with columns in a hand that was trained and bored. Initials and marks and tallies that ended in neat sums. A glass vial stoppered with wax. It looked like nothing. Vale leaned, sniffed the wax, and pulled a handkerchief over his nose before he drew the stopper a finger's width. He did not breathe for a count. He replugged the glass with his jaw set. "Not whiskey," he said. "Not medicine for any living thing," Elias said. Vale sat. He put the gold seal on the ledger leaf and left a faint circle from the ring as if to claim it for the room. His fingers tapped the table edge. He had a tic that came when decisions lived on his skin. "I sign a warrant," he said. "I become a mark on someone else's page. That is the game Trask has been playing. He has boys who write fast. He has horses that do not get tired." "We need law that looks like law," Lena said. Val met her eyes. Her voice had gravel in it from thirst and stitches. He respected the sound without telling himself why. "You give me the glass," he said. "You keep the paper on your body. If I fall, that paper walks again. That is the only way this holds together for more than a night. Elias nodded once. He looked at Lena, and he did not tell her to be brave because she was. She slipped the leaf inside the lining of her coat and felt the cool of the waxed thread. She set the vial in Vale's palm. His fingers closed around it as if it might jump. They heard boots in the hall before the knock. This time it was not a soft sound. Vale put the vial in the drawer and slid his ledger over it. He straightened his vest. He stood with his hands behind his back in a posture that had convinced juries of things for 10 years. Sheriff Cole Trask filled the doorway with calm and rain and tobacco. 2 deputies flanked him in the hall, and the woman from the front desk stood behind them with her apron twisted between her hands. "Evening, Judge," Trask said. "We are collecting vagrants and thieves. We heard some drifted into your fine house." "This is a private room," Vale said. "I am a sitting judge. The hour is late. The law understands courtesy." "The law is wide when I write it," Trask said. He let his gaze walk the room. The table, the lamp, the glass ring on the wood where the saucer had been a season ago. Lena felt her shoulders find the posture of a person who has been measured before and survived it. Elias did not change. "You still keeping field hours," Daka Trask said. "Surgery after midnight, you always like that. Could open a man and the law would not look because the law slept." "I sleep poorly," Elias said. Trask stepped in. He looked at Vale with something like regret. "You sign anything tonight?" Trask asked. "I host guests," Vale said. "You host evidence," Trask said. He said it softly, and it landed harder than if he had shouted. The deputy on the left, a rangy man with a scar at his lip, took a single step to the small table. Vale lifted his hand. The deputy stopped and looked back at Trask. Trask made a small no with his chin, and the man faded to the paper-colored wall. "Judge Vale," Trask said, "the territory thanks you for your service. It also serves you a summons for obstructing an ongoing investigation. You will come along polite as you like." Vale did not touch the drawer. He did not look at the place where the vial hid. He picked up his gold seal and slid it into his pocket as if it were only a coin. He turned to Lena and Elias and said nothing to them with words. His eyes said what mattered. "Go." Elias took the door that was not the door. The window was a shallow square above the washstand. The sash stuck and then lifted. Rain from the eaves had ceased and left beads like a string of clear seeds along the sill. He looked once at Trask. Trask looked back without moving, a game played between men who had shared worse rooms. Lena swung her legs over the sill and dropped into the backyard of the boarding house where laundry lines cut the dark like wire. Elias followed. They landed in mud up to the ankles and moved along the fence that leaned into the night with its nails loose. A dog spoke and then decided not to. Behind them, the room filled with official words said in even tones. Papers moved, boots shifted and then faded. Vale's front door opened and closed. Voices went down the hall and down the stairs and into the street. May met them in the passage by the kitchens with her shoulders squared and her jaw set. She had a dull knife in her hand and a towel over one arm to hide it. "The street is a sieve," she said. "Do not use it. Go through the bathhouse, out the back cut down to the tannery. There is a spillway there, dry most days." They went into steam thick as milk. Lanterns burned behind glass and made halos in the fog. Men turned their faces away without seeing faces. A boy poured a bucket into a tub and laughed when it splashed his boots. Lena held the satchel against her ribs and felt the stitches pull and then settle. The air smelled of soap and wet cedar and men who thought they were clean. Elias pushed through a door warped by years of heat and water and found the alley behind the bathhouse. The tannery lay to the left, a low roof vats in a row hides in their brown work. The spillway cut under the warehouse a stone mouth that took water when the sky chose to give it. Tonight, it took a slow trickle that sang against the lip. They slid down the bank and into the dark. The stone was cool through the soles of their boots. The air inside had the old scent of lye and wet leather. Their breath made small echoes that said nothing about distance. Boots hit gravel above them. Voices bounced off brick and came back wrong. A lantern bobbed across the mouth of the spillway and then another. Light washed the stone with a shallow gold and then went away. They moved in a crouch palms on the wall. The slick places told them where others had gone before. The tunnel turned and took the light with it. Cold held. Water touched their ankles and then did not. A rat went past like a thought you do not want to keep. Elias reached behind him and found Lena's wrist. She let him hold it. He let go. They came to a rusted grate that had been repaired with wire and hope. Elias tested it with his hands and it shifted a hair. He set his shoulder, and it gave enough to let a person through if that person was willing to breathe shallow. Lena went first. The wire snagged her coat. She held still and waited for the snag to decide. It let go. She came out into a crawl space lined with broken brick and roots that had learned to drink fog. A shape moved in the dark ahead of them. Not a deputy, too small. The shape held still, then a whisper. "Doc," a voice said, "you get lost or you come to see my kingdom." Elias did not raise the rifle. He knew the voice. It belonged to a boy who swept the livery when the light was good and slept in its hay when it was not. It belonged to someone who had watched men long enough to know where they did not look. "Show us a door," Elias said. The boy grinned, teeth white in the dark. He put a finger to his lips even though no one was speaking. He turned and slid on his belly under a beam that had been too low since the mill burned 10 years ago. Elias and Lena followed. The space narrowed, and the sound of the town faded until it was only a rumor. Behind them in the alley by the tannery, a voice like gravel called for silence. A lantern scraped against stone. Light broke across the far wall of the crawl space in a thin blade. It stopped on the grate where Elias's shoulder had left a smear of mud. The light held. The blade widened. Then someone put a hand through the opening and touched the snag of wire that had caught Lena's coat. The wire sang a single high note. The hand tightened. The grate began to lift. The grate lifted a finger's width. The wire sang. Light cut the crawl space and turned dust into bright seeds that hung and trembled. The livery boy slid close and put his mouth to Elias's ear. "Left-hand side there is a slit. Belly crawl. I go first." He flattened and vanished into a seam of broken brick. Elias felt for it and found nothing. Then a pocket of cold air, then the smooth groove where many shoulders had passed. He pushed Lena toward it. Her coat snagged a root. She breathed out and let herself become thin. The root let go. She slid forward until the brick scratched her cheek. Elias came last and put his boot to the grate as if it were a door he was tired of. It dropped back to stone. A deputy cursed, and the sound filled the tunnel and then fell off. They moved on elbows. The seam stank of old water and places where only rats felt at ease. Far behind, metal scraped rock. The grate lifted again, slow and patient. The boy whispered a single sound and vanished through a cut in the foundation. Lena followed and spilled into a narrow utility chamber with a ceiling so low she could kiss it. A trickle ran through the center and made the floor a black mirror. The room had once held a bell rope. Rusted hooks still lined the wall. "All the old bones touch," the boy said. He grinned and pointed. "This goes to the mission cistern. I sleep there when the nights are open. The bats do not mind." He took them into a channel that had been hand-dug and squared with brick. Their hands found the bricks that had been touched by generations of tired fingers. The sound of pursuit turned to a faint complaint, and then to nothing. Elias counted his breaths by fours. He touched Lena's sleeve once to tell her he was still there. She did not slow or hurry. They came up under a stone lip. The boy pushed a slab, and cool night fell in thin and blue. They climbed into a walled court where a wellhead sat like an altar. The cracked mission rose around it. Arches cut holes in the sky. The bell hung in its frame and held a shadow inside its crack like a secret. The storm had gone and left the world clean and slick. The cottonwoods whispered to each other. The air smelled of wet lime and old smoke. The bats gave a last ragged sweep and folded themselves under eaves. A moth found the last lantern in the court and battered it until its wings were ash. The boy pointed to a gap in the north wall. "Out there is a footpath to the wash and the open ground. Nobody watches it because it gives them thorns." Elias took the boy by the neck and put a coin in his palm. He did not look at the amount. "Go home," he said. "I am home," the boy said. He slipped back through the slab like a fish finding a clean current. Lena touched the stone of the wellhead and let the chill hold her. The stitches held. The satchel rode high under the coat. The ledger leaf warmed to her skin where she had tucked it. She looked up at the bell. It had a clapper the size of her forearm. The rope below it had been cut and knotted again short and ugly. Elias listened. The town lay down the slope, a scatter of oil lights and the steady glow of the pine box. He could hear the horses in the livery shifting metal on wood quiet as a prayer no one meant. Then another sound. Hoofbeats that knew where they were going. Not many. Not the whole herd. The sound had Trask in it. "Move," Elias said. They took the gap in the wall and the thorns took attacks. Branches snagged cloth and hair. The path ran along the outer parapet and then down in loose scree. They slid. Stones moved and then stopped, held by roots that grew from the wall itself. The slope dropped into wash, and beyond the wash, the basin. The basin would open tonight in safe distance. They had 100 yards of ruin to cross, and then they could choose how to breathe. They did not get the 100 yards. Men rose from the shadows where the wall had fallen. 2 on the left, 1 on the right. Shapes that smelled of saddle soap and tobacco. The first man on the left lifted a lamp and turned the wick. Light reached the curve of his jaw and the slow smile under his scar. The second man had a shotgun held low and easy. The one on the right had Trask's posture without his authority. Sheriff Cole Trask stood under the bell where his hat brim made a clean arc over his eyes. He might have been carved there in the days when the mission had a choir. He held his cigarette like it was a metronome for his patients. He did not look surprised. "You take every back door, Doc," Trask said. "You never did like the front." Lena stood very still. The satchel strap bit her shoulder, and the pain made her vision fine. She watched Trask's hands. It was never the face that told the truth. She tried to taste the air and decide how many shooters she smelled. 3 in sight, 2 more within call. The silence between sentences said so. Elias said nothing. He watched the bell rope and the distance from his boots to the wellhead. He had a surgeon's map in his mind, and he laid it over the court. Entrances, exits, the place a man would fall if you took his hip, the place a shotgun pattern would take. Trask stepped away from the bell, and the crack in its side showed the pale of the sky through iron. He angled his body like a man who anticipated fast things. He said to Lena without looking at her, "That satchel is mine." "It is not," Lena said. He smiled as if a child had said a new word. "You brought Judge Vale something that will hurt people with gold teeth. You think paper is a weapon. It is when you have a printer. You do not." "Maybe someone does," she said. Trask's smile thinned. "Judge Vale will go to the jail, and then to the courthouse, and then to the jail again. He will not come back to his bed. The town will call it a misunderstanding. The books will call it nothing. Hand me the paper, and you get to rest a day longer." Elias shifted his weight. The deputy with the scar saw it and saw nothing because the movement was the size of a breath. The shotgun man watched Elias's hands. He held his barrel steady, but his stance showed a knee that did not love him. Elias kept the knee in his eye. "Tom A." Trask said, "Say hello to the doctor." Tom worked his wrists against rope burns that came from a windmill ladder. He touched his face as if his pride had left a mark. "Evening," he said. Elias said, "You were more comfortable on my hay." Tom showed his teeth and kept both hands out where the gun could see them. Trask took 3 steps toward Lena. He did not lift his gun. He did not need to. His hand opened. She saw the inside of his palm, a white line where a knife had kissed him long ago. She took a half step back, and her heel touched the wellhead. Her hand found the stone. Her other hand found the cut rope that hung from the bell. It was greasy with old oil and dust. She curled her fingers around it. "Give me the paper," Trask said. His voice went low. No one else moved. The sky breathed. Lena raised her chin and said, "I saw what you did at the rail camp." "You saw boys who could not hold drink," Trask said. He did not look at Elias. "You saw a lieutenant who made a mistake with his own mouth. You did not see me. I am careful." "I saw your initials in the ledger," she said. "You do not hide when you are paid." He did not like that. It was a small shift that looked like nothing. His eyes slid, then came back sharp. He moved his weight to his front foot. The court held its breath. Elias moved first. He stepped into the shotgun man's line and did not look at the barrel. He saw only the bad knee. He put a round into it, and the man folded with a howl that turned to a wet sound when his face met the stones. The shotgun fired into the air and tore a hole in the night. Bats lifted and the bell shook in its frame without a hand touching the rope. The deputy with the scar jerked his lamp and lost it. It broke in a soft, green gust against the wall. Kerosene spread and took a lick of flame that crawled but did not catch. Elias put a second round into the man's forearm at the tendon that makes a hand open. The deputy's revolver fell as if he had meant to let it go. Trask did not jump. He moved like a cat that has lived on hard ground. He went for Lena's wrist. His fingers closed around the coat. The satchel slid forward and he took it with his other hand. The strap tore and the leather went from her with a sound that made her throat close. Trask threw the coat aside and opened the bag with one motion. He looked inside. Bandage, a turn of wire, a small sewing tin, nothing else. He looked at her and his face turned clean and blank. The blank was worse than anger. He saw the weight of the coat and everything that meant. "You sew it in," he said. His voice went quiet and steady. "Of course you did." He pulled her close and put his revolver against the outer seam of the coat where the paper rode. The barrel was cold. She felt it through wet wool and thread. He did not look at Elias. He did not need to. "Drop the gun, Doc," Trask said. "You once told a corporal to breathe while you opened him. You spoke soft. Speak soft now. Put that iron down." Elias did not answer. He lifted the muzzle a breath toward Trask's middle. He could take the ribs. He could take the spine. He could end it. He saw the field and the way it looked when it was over. He saw men he had closed with clean stitches so they could be buried. He did not move his finger. "Lena," he said. She felt the rope under her hand. She felt the knot. She thought of the cracked bell and the sound it made that was not a sound a town wanted. She pulled the rope with everything in her arm. It fought once, then moved. The clapper swung wide and kissed iron. The first strike was thin a bird bone tapping a kettle. The second hit rocked the frame. The third went through the court like a blade of cold. The sound stunned the night. Horses in the basin threw their heads. Dogs yelled. Lanterns lifted. The deputies flinched. Trask did not. He kept the gun tight to the seam, and the seam printed into her flesh. Elias used the strike. He put a bullet into Trask's hip where the nerve lives. The shot hit, and Trask's legs forgot their orders. He fell sideways, but his hand stayed on the gun. The round went off into stone and took a bite that spat dust. Lena twisted, and the barrel slid along the coat and lost her. She dropped to her knees and rolled behind the wellhead with the ledger leaf hot against her skin. Tom moved, and Elias took his wrist and bent it against itself. The revolver clattered. The shotgun man crawled and forgot he was in a fight. The deputy with the scar tried to make his hand close around a gun that did not belong to him anymore and failed. Trask lay on his side with his breath going out in measured pieces. He took his hat off with a little motion and set it on the stone by his head as if order still mattered. He looked at his hip and did not touch it. Blood ran into the dust in a dark sheet. He lifted his eyes to Elias and found him. "You could have taken my heart," Trask said. His voice was flat and small in the wide court. "I am not a butcher," Elias said. Trask smiled without teeth. "You're a coward." "Tonight I am a man who did not kill you," Elias said. Lena stood with the cut rope in her hand. The bell tolled again, softer now, a long, tired breath. She looked at Trask and saw nothing of mercy and nothing that asked for any. She looked at Elias and saw the map still on his face, edges and turns and rooms that linked. Behind the wall, the town woke. A window slid open. A voice asked a question and got no answer. Elias kicked Trask's revolver across the court. It hit the base of the bell and stopped. He took the rope he found on the wall hooks and tied Trask's wrists with neat surgeon's knots that would not give without patience and daylight. He used the cut bell rope on his ankles. The fibers were thick and slick with age. The knot set. Trask watched him without blinking. "You will not walk far with me behind you," Trask said. Elias looked at the cracked bell. A moth had found the lantern by the door again and beat itself to nothing. The court held that last wing beat. The sound of horses came low from the basin and rolled up the slope like a slow tide. The mission stones kept their ghosts. The bell rope hung with the weight of what it had done. The bell kept its hard breath while the court filled with the sounds of a town waking wrong. Elias wiped his hands on his shirt and picked up the fallen satchel. Lena pressed her palm to the coat where the page warmed under the seam. Trask lay trussed with clean knots and watched like a man counting the rain. The livery boy's face peered from the gap in the wall. He jerked his chin once and vanished. Elias took Lena by the sleeve and they followed through thorn and broken brick. The path sloped to the wash and into scrub where the night carried a thin smell of creosote. The mare waited where they had left her reins looped on a split rail. The sorrel dozed with its fogged eye half open. They mounted and rode in the shadow of the ridge until the ground took them into the safer dark. They reached Dryden Crossing when the eastern sky showed a bruised yellow. The stage office sat with its window lit and its fly-specked glass humming. A moth beat itself flat and rose again toward the lamp, a soft tap that did not stop. The telegraph key clicked and rang, then paused, then tapped again. The operator, a narrow man with eyes like pins, looked up with the suspicion of someone who had seen the night do stranger things. Elias set a coin on the counter. Lena leaned and gave a name and a place. United States Marshals in Denver. Judge Orson Vale of Jericho Flats. Sheriff Cole Trask. Colonel Alton Sykes. The operator's mouth made the words while his fingers hammered them into wire and air. Tap, tap, longer tap. The sound asked for help without apology. The man nodded once and sent it again for insurance, then turned the knob that made the sound stop. They took coffee at a table by the door and watched the road. The steam rose and smelled of scorched beans and grit. The mare breathed audibly. The sorrel stamped. The key clicked. The The man listened with his ear near the coil, then wrote in a hand that angled with care. "Denver says ride in and hold tight," he said. Elias looked at Lena and said nothing. They did not sleep. The room seemed to lean toward the door. First light came cold and thin, then hooves in cadence. A wagon rolled behind, star badges dulled with dust. 2 marshals swung down with bodies that knew work. Behind them came Orson Vale, hat in hand, hair wet from a bucket. His cheek wore a cut. His collar was open. His eyes were clear. "Morning," he said to the operator. The word had gratitude inside it and something like anger. Vale shook Elias's hand, and then Lena's. He set a palm on the satchel without asking what was inside. His other hand slid into his vest and came out with the glass vial wrapped in a handkerchief. He had not let it go. He set it on the counter, and the lamp's light went through it and turned the table's knot into a little planet. "We will take the sheriff," the older marshal said, steady as fence posts. "We will take his books and his men if they like to come. We will take anyone who says no and put him where the saying hurts." They went back up the slope to the mission. Morning took the edge off the ruin and made the cracks look honest. The bell held its long split like a smile that did not reassure anyone. Tom and the scarred deputy sat where Elias had left them, bound and sullen and quiet. The shotgun man bled on the stones and had stopped trying to be brave. Trask lay with his hat near his ear and watched the sky as if it might offer terms. The marshals moved with simple economy. They lifted Trask without jarring his hip and set him on a plank, then on a wagon bed. They cut the deputy free and clapped irons on with a rhythm that never tried to be pretty. The older marshal walked the court and saw the way it had gone. He put a hand to the bell rope and then let it hang. "You could have finished him," he said to Elias without tone. "I did not," Elias said. The marshal nodded, as if that sorted only one thing and not more. He sent a man to the judge's boarding house. Vale went with him and came back with a drawer under his arm and a clerk flat with fright. The vial lay inside, nestling in folded shirts small as a bullet. Vale set his gold seal on a blank and pressed it while the wax was still hot. The ring left a crest that shone and then dulled. At the courthouse, they opened the safe that did not have a key and found ledgers under ledgers. Values tallied, initials notched. Sykes again and again where the ink looked newer than the rest. Vale read until his jaw worked and then stopped to breathe. May Abbott stood in the doorway with her arms bare and a bruise forming like a storm under one eye. She did not speak. She met Trask's stare across the room as they carried him past. He did not blink. She lifted her chin and stepped aside for the law. By noon, Jericho Flats took a breath it had not taken in years. The windmill behind the livery turned slow. Dust went nowhere. Men read their own names in book columns and did not speak them. The marshals put Trask in a wagon with a canvas over and headed east, with Vale, the vial, and the ledgers packed like winter stores. In the narrow quiet that came after Elias and Lena stood in front of the pine box, the sign creaked and the piano inside breathed a sour chord when the floor settled. May brought them a bowl of stew that had decided to try again. She set bread beside it and a knife that held an edge. "You leave now," she said to Lena, and the words came rough from a throat that had shouted for a long time. "Or you stay. Both are expensive." Lena looked at the road, the water trough, the mission on its ridge with the cracked bell black in frames of sky. She touched her coat where the seam lay. The paper was gone from it now. The coat felt lighter, and she did not know if that was good. "I need a place with clean water," she said, "and a table I can trust." Elias understood without looking at her. He took the satchel and the small ring of keys that belonged to his doctor's kit. He ran his thumb over the nick in the scissor blade. He turned and looked for a building that wanted to change its life. They found it near a spring that had fed cattle and washwomen since before the first survey. The sign above the door was a tin bell that someone had hammered flat from roof metal and painted an honest blue. Juniper scratched the windows. The water came up cold and tired and did not argue when taken. 6 months later, the lamp over the front room pulled moths out of the dusk. They tapped and spun and found their mistake and tapped again. The windmill behind the clinic turned in a clean arc and sang when it took a gust. Inside the room smelled of carbolic and coffee and wet wool hung on pegs. A boy sat on a chair with his pants leg rolled a gash that needed 6 neat stitches. Elias's hands moved and tied and snipped. He scraped the thread across his thumb to find the roughness and changed it when it caught. He spoke only enough. The boy watched and did not faint. Lena stood at the basin and washed blood from her fingers. The water ran pink and then clear. She didn't brace when the rope on the ceiling creaked because it was only herbs drying and not a noose. She dried her hands and went to the shelf where the ledger lived. This one held the names of fevers, and broken wrists owed sums notations of milk or eggs taken instead of coin. Her handwriting had become steady and small. May stepped in with a basket and the smell of bread. Her bruise had gone months ago, left a pale echo under the eye that returned when she had not slept. She set the basket down and leaned one hip against the counter. Judge Vale stopped by the pine box at noon, she said without ceremony. Asked after you. He had a paper in his pocket and a temper in his mouth. He said the colonel is in a place with a lock that keeps honest time. He said Trask's case moved to a federal bench. That was all. He left it there. Lena nodded and did not ask for dates. She knew the feel of time now by different measures. The taste of iron when a storm lifts. The weight of a satchel when it carries nothing that can ruin a person's heart. The clean ache in her side when the day ran long. She sliced bread. She handed May the heel. Elias wrapped the boy's leg and told him when to come back. The boy nodded with the seriousness children give to instructions that feel like magic. He paid with a jar of honey and left with his hat in his hands, careful as a man crossing ice. The door closed behind him and the clinic settled around its own sounds. A fly bumped the screen and gave up. The wind tilted the tin bell and it clinked. Water in the pipe spoke to itself. Elias stood by the window and watched the windmill count a sky without weather. The scar on his forearm had faded to the color of new ash. He rubbed it as if it were still fresh and then let his hand fall. Lena stepped beside him and looked out at the run of scrub and the vein of the road horses throwing dust, a cart with a piano on its back like a promise it did not know if it could keep. You sleep at all, she said. Between names, he said. She smiled a little. There are more names. There are, he said. The lamp hummed a beat that matched the pulse in the room. A moth slid along the glass and settled. Outside, the wind touched the bell sign, and it answered with a small, clean note. The sound did not belong to any hour. It was enough. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.